Good evening. My name is Gina Peril, and on behalf of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate, it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program. The next generation of leaders is here. Thank you to the Institute members who are here tonight. Your support makes conversations like this possible. Thank you also to our community partners, the Massachusetts Alliance of College Republicans, the Massachusetts Women's Political Caucus, Spark Boston, and City Awake for supporting this program and for building pathways for engagement in our civic life. We have an outstanding program ahead. We're going to hear from State Senator Patrick O'Connor, Akilah Johnson of the Boston Globe, and a panel of emerging leaders that I look forward to telling you more about. You have joined us for a conversation about public service, about making a difference in our communities, about leadership, and about participation. Senator Kennedy served in the United States Senate for 47 years. He strongly believed that a successful democracy depended on active participation. He was a constant advocate for empowering people to take an active role in their communities, and he envisioned this institute as a place where engagement like that could be fostered. So we've all seen the articles claiming that the millennial generation's love of avocado toast is ruining their chances to buy homes, that their disengagement with politics is changing elections, that their employment preferences are ruining the 40-hour work week. These generalizations about millennials are a frequent conversation point among my colleagues here at the Institute, because that is not the millennial generation that we see coming through the door at the Institute. And it's not the generation of millennials that we see working as public servants and serving as leaders in our state. There are scores of millennials committed to giving their time and talents. And it might not look the same as older generations did their thing, but the commitment is real and it's active. The future of our democracy depends on engaged, innovative people willing to find common ground and create the future that reflects what we want to be as a nation. The Institute is committed to highlighting the ways that citizens can create change, and tonight we're particularly committed to demonstrating the positive impact that current generations are already having. Tonight's speakers, the panelists, the moderator, they all represent the best of this notion, and we're so happy to have them here with us tonight. So now it's my honor to introduce our first speaker. State Senator Patrick M. O'Connor joined the Massachusetts Senate in May of 2016. He serves as Senate Minority Whip and represents the Plymouth and Norfolk District. Senator O'Connor has spent over a decade in public service as a town councilor in Weymouth and as legislative director for former Senator Bob Hedlund. I'm pleased to introduce him now to share his story and his path to public service. Please welcome Senator Patrick O'Connor.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Gina, for that introduction. It's an honor to be here tonight as an introductory speaker to this event. The Edward M. Kennedy Institute does fantastic work in providing a hands-on experience to visitors and engaging the community about the importance of participation in democracy. It is programs like the event here tonight that help us stay engaged and learn from each other about how we can build better communities. I'd like to start with a bit about my background. As Gina had mentioned, I'm the state senator for the Plymouth and Norfolk District, which represents Weymouth down to Duxbury on the South Shore. I'm so proud to represent these 8 beautiful communities on the South Shore, but it wasn't on my professional experiences alone that got me to where I am today, so I'd like to give you a little bit of my background. My family is originally from Cambridge, and my grandmother was the first in my family to work at the State House in 1950 when she joined the staff of then Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill. My mother is a neonatal intensive care nurse at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, before then St. Margaret's, of over 40 years. My father is a plumber in Local 12, and they taught me everything from a very young age about the importance of hard work, dedication, and commitment to your goals. In addition, a lot of what they have been able to do in life have afforded me the opportunities to stand here today. After graduating high school in 2003, I was fortunate enough to go to England and attend Kingston University in London. This experience gave me a new perspective of the world and on society. It allowed me to talk to people about their dreams, their ambitions, their fears, and their opinions. I credit my time overseas in transforming me into the person that I am today. When school would break for holidays, or I would return home one time for the Red Sox when they were in the World Series for the first time in 2004, I'd return to Weymouth to visit family and friends and notice that things were changing. I saw changes that I didn't like, and I continuously saw these as I continued to come home. Some of the changes that I didn't see were municipal things like Legion Field, which was the recreational field that we had in our high school where we played lacrosse, football, and soccer on. When I returned home, that field had been transformed into a pile of dirt because the mayor at that point in time thought that was the best location to put the dirt from the Greenbush commuter rail construction project. The second problem that I saw, what was very evident, was the opiate crisis in my hometown. At that point in time, in 2005, it was mostly addiction to pain medication, but there was also the beginning stages of the heroin epidemic that we face today. And the third problem that I saw was the former South Weymouth Naval Air Station, which Senator Kennedy at the point in time helped so long foster from BRAC closure, but eventually in 1995, the Base Realignment Commission closed the former South Weymouth Naval Air Station. A decade later, we were still left without a redevelopment project. So I knew at this point in time I needed to do whatever I could to help my hometown. So at that point in time, at the age of 20, I decided to run for Weymouth Councillor at Large, a job tasked to represent approximately 55,000 people that live in Weymouth. The summer of 2005, I started a grassroots door-to-door campaign, raising money from family and friends, which I can attest is the hardest part of politics. Buying door hangers, bumper stickers, and yard signs, literally a grassroots campaign. I worked hard to deliver my message to the residents of Weymouth that the status quo was unacceptable and that we could do a lot better. That November, I was successful, and in January of 2006, at the age of 21, I was sworn into office. I spent my first term on the council developing relationships with my colleagues that today have formed into some of the strongest friendships that I have. We don't always agree, but we compromise. We get things done, and in the end, we always do what we feel is best for our town. In 2014, I was voted council president by a board of 8 Democrats, 2 independents, and myself being the sole Republican. I was honored to have their trust and be reelected as council president in 2016. This is one of my proudest moments in my career because it amplifies what I stand for in public life, that it's not about Republican or Democrat or independent or conservative or liberal or moderate. It's about making sure government works for people and making sure that government is there to help lift people up who can't stand on their own. The experience and knowledge that I've gained working in municipal government with a bipartisan team will serve me the rest of my life. Last year, I ran 4 races, a special primary contested race in April, a special general in May, a contested primary in September, and a contested general in November. I was successful in all of these races to have the honor of representing the South Shore in the Senate. My first year as state senator has been an incredible journey. I'm extremely fortunate to be working with some of the brightest minds in government. As a 33-year-old millennial, I am not alone. I share this distinction with my colleagues, Senator Joseph Boncory, Senator Julian Cyr, Senator Ryan Fatman, and Senator Eric Lesser. We all work together with every member of the Senate with a mutual sense of respect and willingness to help get things done. I've always valued the opinion of older generations. They have seen it and lived it. They have traveled the journey and done what they thought was best for society. But I also strongly believe this younger millennial generation is trying to shape the future and be proactive in making change and working together despite party affiliations or some differences. I strongly believe in a bipartisan approach. As a state senator, I believe you have to work across the aisle. The long-time dysfunction in Washington has only hurt the middle class and has only strengthened special interests. We are very lucky to live in Massachusetts. When it comes to hospitals or healthcare or public education or higher education or services for our developmentally disabled or mental health services or services to benefit our veterans, we lead the nation, and in some of these categories we lead the world. That's because Massachusetts leads together. It is my hope that when Washington, D.C. eventually decides to get its act together, they can look to Massachusetts as an example of how government works for the people. Tonight's panel will highlight how the millennial generation can and have served their communities through advocacy and politics. There are younger people in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and around the nation that are willing to put in the work that makes positive change in their communities. These efforts can be either inside the government, such as those you will see and hear from tonight, or part of an organization outside of the government that seeks to make positive change through its institutions. There is a saying from Tip O'Neill that all politics is local, and I believe that to be the case. Through my work in Weymouth municipal government, I see that seeking change through local institutions can have a tremendous impact on people's lives. It is also the level of government that I believe you can see most significant impact. Even being in the state legislature, I truly believe that municipal government is where the rubber meets the road. The three issues that I talked about earlier in the speech that inspired me to run, one being the opiate crisis. Weymouth lost 38 individuals last year to the opiate epidemic. We are making strides, though. As council president, I started the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Committee because I believe that far too many people are suffering in silence with mental illness and far too many people are losing their battle with addiction. After an individual overdoses at one of our hospitals, we have a social worker as well as a plain-dressed Weymouth police officer show up and offer them services. We have continuously made strides, and just last month at International Overdose Awareness Day, we held our first opiate vigil in the town of Weymouth, where we attracted over 450 people. The second, Legion Field, I'm proud to report, is the recreational gem of Weymouth once again. As council president, we put in $7 million in a rehabilitation project to make sure that that was back to prominence. And the third is the former South Weymouth Naval Air Station. I've spent a lot of time on this project, and this has transformed from something that was closed to, in the past decade, becoming a project that's on pace for 4,500 housing units, 8 million square feet of commercial development, and at the end of the day, will provide the town of Weymouth, which is a cash-strapped town that doesn't have commercial real estate bases, doesn't even have a downtown, will provide the town of Weymouth $15 million in additional tax revenue. It's also listed as, right now, by Boston Business Journal as the largest development in the Northeast United States. I cannot stress enough the importance of civic engagement. Participation in a democratic system is crucial, not only for getting the type of representation you want to see and deserve, but also for the health of democracy itself. We have an inherent responsibility as not just residents of our communities, but as full citizens. This responsibility is to get involved in our civic life. I firmly believe that many of the problems that are paralyzing our nation, whether it be partisanship, gridlock, or the prevalence of extreme voices, are because we are failing at that basic mission. When those who want to see things get done in America, who I believe are the majority, become disillusioned and by the dysfunction that they see and do not involve themselves in civic life, they allow the loudest voices, who are numerically outnumbered, to dominate the conversation. The practical result of this is that we elect individuals beholden to a loud minority or special interests instead of problem solvers or pragmatists who are dedicated to getting things done. We have real problems in this country that we must fix. Problems that will simply not go away without real reform and the political will and courage to do so. When I first ran for office and I was 20 years old, my great-uncle Ed McCann, who was a town administrator in Marshfield and Situate, with two towns that I'm privileged enough to represent, he gave me a check and gave me the book Profiles in Courage by President Kennedy, and he inscribed in that, to make public life honorable and productive, one must possess principle, honesty, and bravery. These are neither Democrat nor Republican qualities, but qualities that the electorate deserve from the elected. I've lived my political life, my public life, by those words. I thank the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for having me speak here tonight. I hope that we see through this panel discussion that the millennial generation is indeed ready to take the lead as we guide our communities into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator, for joining us and for your remarks. It's always a pleasure to have you here. So now it's time for me to tell you about our panelists. This is a bipartisan group of emerging millennial leaders working in government, including at Boston City Hall and the Massachusetts State House. After the panel discussion, there'll be time for question and answers from the audience, and at the end of the evening, we'll have a reception in the lobby where the conversation can continue. So, our panelists. Sam Chambers is the LGBTQ Community Liaison and Public Information Officer for the Mayor of Boston's Office of Neighborhood Services. Sibu Malaba is the Executive Director for the Massachusetts Black and Latino Legislative Caucus. Erin Santhouse is the Executive Director for the Mayor's Office of Scheduling and Advance. Hirak Shaw is Legal Counsel for the Office of State Senate Minority Leader Bruce E. Tarr. And tonight's conversation will be moderated by Akilah Johnson of the Boston Globe. Akilah's sharp reporting covers immigrant communities as well as the people behind city and state policies. So panelists and moderator, will you please come forward and join us?
We were so excited earlier, we tried to hop up here before we were ready. So, tonight I hope we can do a little bit of myth busting, shall we say, and gain some insight, right? Because if you go to, as my mother would call it, the Google, and put in the words millennial and public service, you get a lot of doomsday-esque headlines about a disengaged generation, graying government, antiquated technology, millennials turned off, soured on this entire concept of public service. And I am seated here with 4 people who prove that to be absolutely not true. And so I hope we can just kind of get into it and have a conversation about why you all are doing what it is that you're doing, how you came to be in the positions that you came to be in, and kind of your road to public service. And then there's some questions that we've gotten from the audience, and one of the big things that it seems like people are interested in is kind of insights and advice for how folks who want to do this work can start. So I guess let's start at the beginning, and it's, how did you all come to public service as a career option? Or did you choose it, or did it choose you?
All right, I'll go first. So I've been with the mayor's office now since his campaign. Me and Erin actually were some of his first hires. So we've gone from a very cramped downtown office to the mayor's car to City Hall. But let's see here. So I was an international relations major in college, and I really got into politics right around when I was choosing different colleges. And so I ran for office in school. I was a senator for my college, involved with my school's College Democrats Club, and then graduated, interned with my congresswoman, and then decided to move to Boston, where I really wanted to get into Boston politics. Interned with a local lobbying firm where they specialized in nonprofits, and then interned on Congressman Lynch's campaign as his press intern, and that's where I met the mayor, and he brought me on board, and I've been on this great ride ever since.
Okay, I'll go next. Hey everyone, I'm Sibu. So I kind of happened to stumble into public service. I grew up here in Massachusetts, from Lawrence. Anybody? Lawtown? So Massachusetts has always been home. I went to college at Emmanuel College at the Fenway. I studied history and English communications. I really thought that I was going to be some big PR agent or be some kind of history professor. So I was kind of on the fence on what I wanted to do, but I didn't have much interest in politics or government at all. I'm gonna admit too much, and I know we just met, but actually I did take American politics. I got a D in that course, so it was not something that I was really particularly interested in. After graduating from Emmanuel, I thought that I wanted to help change the world and offer services that helped me to where I was by doing nonprofit work. So I did fundraising for an educational nonprofit that offered after-school and summer programs. Many programs that similar to what I did as a kid growing up. So after doing fundraising, I felt like I was ready to do something else. And a family friend decided to run for office and said, "Hey, Sibu, join my field team. You're pretty good with people." And I'm like, "What's field? I don't know what that is." So I joined this campaign and I just had the bug. It was really interesting, knocking on doors and talking to voters and connecting with people of all different walks of life. So for a year straight, I just jumped on whoever's campaign would hire me. And I connected with Senator Chang Diaz, who represents parts of Boston, Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. And I ran her field campaign for her reelection race and ended up jumping on board into her office as her legislative aide. And in that role, I got to check out the caucus and sit in on their meetings. So it was awesome sitting in and, listening in on the conversations, and opportunity opened where this position made itself available, and that's how I ended up with the caucus.
So, hi everyone, Hirak Shah. So I guess my trip was kind of in the middle between Sam and Sibu's, where while in undergrad, took a few poli-sci classes, but I think what really kind of drew my interest beginning in undergrad was watching the news and also the TV show West Wing. That really kind of piqued my interest into public policy and kind of being able to learn more about becoming more engaged in the world around me. So and then went to law school and took classes in public policy realm as well as constitutional law. And I really thought that for me, what I would like to do is a lot of like the behind the scenes work in the legislature or in state government, because for anyone that watches the news or tries to stay engaged, a lot of times you'll see a lot of talking heads and people complaining, but no one really going out and trying to make changes. So I figured at the very least after law school, I kind of, while waiting for bar results, walked around the State House and dropped off my resume. And fortunately enough, Senator Tarr was one of the recipients of my resume. So I started off as doing an internship with him and worked for different senators, Senator Fargo for a year before returning to Senator Tarr's office. Now currently his legal counsel, and it's been a great run ever since.
Last but not least, Erin, Santhouse. I was a political science major at Northeastern. It was sort of a last-minute decision. I wanted to be an author growing up, and Northeastern was the first school that I got into that was in Boston, and the goal was Boston. It was always Boston. And I realized, right after I accepted that they didn't have a creative writing program. So I was like, I guess I'll do political science. That sounds good. One thing I always had growing up was opinions, and I figured at least I can turn that into something. Northeastern has the co-op program. It makes you think about your career really early on and kind of start, thinking big picture, long term, making choices that, might put you on a track that you can't control. So I remember thinking to myself, asking yourself those questions, what motivates me? What do I want to do? I've never really been a money motivated person. I don't, have much of an affinity for titles or achievement for achievement's sake. And I have a tendency, I could be kind of a slacker if I don't care. So I figured out pretty quickly, I was going to have to find a career that aligned with my values, or I would burn out. A career is a really long thing. So I started looking around for internships in advocacy organizations, nonprofits that, were working for causes that I really cared about. I ended up at NARAL Pro-Choice Massachusetts, working for the political director there. He really took me under his wing and introduced me to a lot of people, and you know, was the first experience where somebody who was a little bit older and had some experience in this space just talked to me and treated me like I was a person with thoughts and, you know, could contribute. And I was just kind of like, wow, like I'm no one. Why are these people like listening to me? I really liked that you could just kind of show up in the space and, you know, affect the conversation. So I heard we were Mass Women's Political Caucus is involved in this event. Cool. I interned there at one point, and the former executive director, Preeti, I don't know if you know her, she had some guest speakers from the State House in to talk about campaigns and different jobs on campaigns. And I remember we were going around in a circle and talking about, you know, this is what the field team does, this is what the press office does. And I remember them saying, like, finance, campaign finance, like no one wants to ask people for money. No one, there's always jobs in campaign finance. So, you know, we ended up talking about what we would want to do, and I was like, I'll do that. Like, I like that. And, you know, Boston politics is a really small world. They shared their office with some consultants who were working on the 2013 mayor's race, and literally happened to overhear and come over and be like, hey, we need a finance person. And so that's how I got introduced to the mayor. The first question I asked of this person was, how is he on women's rights? How is he on gay rights? Tell me a little bit about this guy. He was like, he is very, very progressive, and he's the mayor for our time because he speaks to all generations. And I have found that to be true. I also got the bug, fell in love with the campaign, fell in love with the candidate, the whole public service piece. And yeah, it was nice. It was fun sharing a car with backseat with Sam.
I mean, is this process, excuse me, a little intimidating, right? So if someone who knows nothing about the political landscape or public service, I mean, I don't know that I would have the gumption or the chutzpah to go dropping off my resume around the State House, or just to call somebody up and think, I want to get an internship with your office. I mean, can you demystify that process a little bit for anybody who doesn't really kind of understand what some of these various kind of entrees are? And is it really as simple as just dropping off your resume? I think some people may be a little intimidated by walking into some of these spaces.
To a certain extent, it is. A lot of people at the State House, they actually started off just by going office to office and dropping off their resume. And a lot of times, if you're able to do an internship at the State House, that helps demystify a lot of the process. And you'll probably see that a lot of staffers that work at the State House were usually either working on the campaign for their boss, or they interned at the State House. It is, you know, don't get me wrong, the State House is a very awe-inspiring building. It's, you know, but until you take a step in and kind of go office to office, you know, that will be the way that you make the connections, because a lot of times if you're into politics and want to work in government or anything like that, anytime, stop by your senator or your state rep's office and just say hi. And, you know, you're their constituent. They're there to, they're there to serve, to serve you in a sense. And even if they may not be able to have a position or something for you, they may be able to point you in the right direction.
Just bouncing off of that, I do think it's a lot more, it appears to be a lot more intimidating than it is. One of the things that I've always really loved about the civic environment here in Boston and Massachusetts is how easy it is to, you just kind of raise your hand and say like, oh, I'd like to be involved, and welcomed right in. Politics and government are very relational. Just having conversations with people, knowing people, having somebody say like, oh, I know Hirak, he's great, like bring him in, it's almost as simple as that. And you know, coming to events like these, talking to people afterwards, sharing your business cards, even like if you're somebody who retweets a lot, like politicians are politicians because they recognize names and they know people and they remember those things. Like it's, you know, if you like to talk, like you can find someone to talk to and they'll remember you.
So what would be your 30-second elevator spiel to someone who is interested in getting into civic engagement politics, understanding that they probably are dealing with a lot of student debt, if you're like me and Navient, Sally Mae is someone who comes knocking every month. So, you know, and they're thinking pay, they're thinking cost of living, they're thinking of all of these things, and you're constantly hearing about how government just doesn't pay, public sector work just doesn't pay. So like what's your 30-second elevator spiel to someone who you were trying to bring into the fold?
I mean, it doesn't necessarily, you don't have to work in the public sector to be involved in the public sector. You know, there are a lot of corporations, a lot of organizations that are dying for young people to start some type of affinity group. You know, if you like to recycle, you know, and you work at Fidelity, you know, why not start the Fidelity, you know, recycling group, meets once a month, and, you know, invite, you know, the chief of environment for the city of Boston to come and speak to your organization. Or if there's like a state rep or a state senator that really cares about that issue, invite them in. Because that's a way for these people that are in charge and that, you know, do make these policies to know your name. Oh, you know, Joe at Fidelity, he's really interested in recycling, and we're trying to revamp our recycling program at, you know, City Hall. You know, Joe, why don't you come on in and meet my staff? What are some ideas you have that we can, you know, better improve our situation? So I think it's just, if you care about something, you know, try to affect change in your immediate surroundings, and it'll happen.
Regarding student debt, I know a lot of us here can speak to it at length, but, you know, in the alternative of not making this huge salary in public service, you really walk away with so much more kinds of different kinds of rewards. Going home and knowing that you've helped to promote some kind of change and you were able to see that change is so fulfilling, and that's what keeps you going. And I'm a believer that things just work themselves out, and if you're doing this kind of work and you're feeling passionate about it, that those other things don't seem to matter as much. And lastly, I want to say that, you know, working in this field, you work with other people who share similarities with you and those who don't. But if you're all going through it together, there's this sense of camaraderie. Hirak and I started around the same time in the building, different offices, but, you know, he's the homie, and we've gone through a lot of things working in that building together. So you walk away with so much more than just the salary.
And just to piggyback off of what Sam and Sibu said, definitely that there are rewards that that you really can't achieve just with money working in government. And as Sam mentioned, even if you don't want to work in government because you're concerned about salary or whatnot, try and, you know, do a meetup or meet with people that are, you know, that have similar interests as you, as Sam mentioned, and you guys can advocate for a particular cause and write to your representative or your senator. And a lot of times, you know, you can even propose pieces of legislation. I know in our office we get people writing in with proposed ideas all the time. These are people that either are you know, retired or they're working, but they have an interest in a particular cause. So they'll at least put together an idea of some legislation that they want, and you know, they send it to us, and we're happy to kind of put it into the legislative language. But then, you know, we submit it, and it could end up having a hearing, and who knows, end up being signed into law, and that's one way to be able to be able to get involved with you know, trying to affect change that you're concerned about.
I would also say too that you know, if your motivation is to be a multi-millionaire, then maybe public service isn't the choice for you. But there's plenty of careers in public service that you can make a great living, support a family. There's a big percentage of city jobs that are union, where, you know, the benefits are really the kind of thing that allow you to have a stable life. And I think, you know, it's definitely an option. It's not like you're poor counting pennies necessarily, like making a career in public service. I think that's also just a premise I would push back on.
It's good to know. Come talk to my journalism friends. So let's talk a little bit then about how we define public service and civic engagement, right? Because you all kind of touched on a lot of different avenues and a lot of different ways of looking at it. And I think sometimes people think government, they think public service, it's this kind of all-encompassing, very strict type of role and job that you have to play, and it sounds like there's a little bit of creativity to be had there. So kind of how do you all see the role or different roles of government jobs, public sector jobs, and kind of how does that allow you to be creative in that space, if that makes any sense?
I can start on this one. My role prior to this one, my predecessor, Amy Mahler, sitting in the front row here, was leading the Mayor's Spark Boston Council, which that was the exact job, was looking at city government and saying, how do we connect with millennials? How do we make, we already offer such great programs. We have, all of these things in place that we want millennials to be using and thinking about and incorporating into their lives. And that's an aspect of civic engagement that I think often isn't thought about or talked about. It's, there's voting, there's running for office, there's activism, but also just like engaging in city services, calling your neighborhood liaison when, a pothole needs to be filled, knowing their name, knowing who your city councilor is, meeting them at a local restaurant and talking about issues. Those are all things that like government is doing. And it's just about like, connecting with millennials and making it making the message something that appeals. So I got to do a lot of really creative projects around like, okay, last year we had early voting for the first time in the city of Boston, and on paper that should really appeal to the millennial generation. We are mobile, we're on the go, like you could vote at any polling location regardless of where you lived. So we got to do like all these fun little pop-up activities just to draw attention to it and kind of capitalize on the social aspect of it. And I think that's kind of where the creativity piece is just that last connection. Because again, the services are there and elected officials who are making decisions about where to put resources, millennials are their constituents too. They care about what we want and they're not overlooking us. It's just about like, how do we get that last little ditch effort?
I definitely would agree with what Erin said, and I would say even going further down, as Senator O'Connor mentioned in his speech earlier, it's if you notice things going on where you live and you don't like the way how the town is being run or something like that, that's where on the local level the rubber really meets the road. So it's also engaging very much at the local level, whether it's with your selectmen, whether it's with your town manager, city council. Guaranteed in whatever town you live in, there's probably an opportunity to be able to serve on a board or a commission, and a lot of those seats go unfilled. A lot of times you don't even have enough people that they can meet quorum, so the board can't even meet. And then, so that's one way to definitely kind of get involved and be able to affect change right at the grassroots level, because a lot of times on the local level is where you can make the most change, and it's a good way to kind of move up or not move up, but kind of move on to things afterwards. But I would definitely also, on top of what Erin said, throw in to definitely look at what's going on the local level and engage your selectmen, engage your city councilor, engage your town manager, ask them questions about why certain things are happening the way they are in your town, and there might be an opportunity for you to run for maybe a selectman seat or be on a board or a commission.
I would also say, how many people here live in the city of Boston? So what a lot of people don't realize is every single neighborhood in the city of Boston has some type of neighborhood or resident association. And what people don't also realize is those associations help affect change at a very hyper-local level. Whether or not you want a stop sign, in front of your house, or whether or not, the school bus is late picking up your neighbor's kid, or, a basketball court needs to be repainted. That's a great way for you to get involved at a hyper-local level, because then you get to start meeting your city councilor, and you get to start meeting the mayor, and you get to start meeting your different representatives, and they get to know you, and they say, oh, Joe lives on, East Broadway, he's the resident expert what happens on that street. Joe, we have a board opening for the zoning board. Would you be interested? And that's a great way to get involved, even if you don't want to work for the government. It gets you involved with different, power makers and people involved in making decisions.
One thing I also wanted to add is, as everybody mentioned, there are different ways you could participate in public service, but also I'd love to add that, it's more than just working for an elected or working on specific policy. If you have a passion for like the STEM, engineering or the arts, there are opportunities for you in public service too to work on those type of specialties. So it's pretty open depending on, what your interests are.
How important were mentors or are mentors for you all as you are? How important are mentors, and how important are peer networks?
Everything.
Seconded.
There's always that one person that when you're making decisions, you kind of say, would so-and-so do this? Or I know definitely like so-and-so would stay away from this issue. But it's also important to have some type of network where you can, I always am texting Erin, or I'll stop by her office and, ask her questions about this, or I'll just vent about something that's going on, and she'll say, well, have you tried this? Or you should talk to this. And I think especially when it comes to millennials, it's very important to have that network, because they know someone that might be able to help you accomplish your goal, or accomplish, a task, or they might be able to help you with some type of, passion project that you might have.
I have a friend who refers to your professional peer network as your board of directors, which I really love as a metaphor, because echoing Sam's statement, there are mentors in my life, there are people that I work with that I trust, friends, close colleagues, and I would never, just follow one person's path. It's really important to have people that you can sort of crowdsource opinions on and say all right, I have this decision to make or this dilemma, and I'm going to ask, my mentor who's a mom and is very caring and has always treated me like, one of her daughters, and then I'm going to ask my badass girl boss who I, aspire to be one day, but am a little intimidated by, and somewhere in the middle, maybe I'll find my answer. But just having that ability is really important. And the other thing that I think is incredibly important about mentorship and peer networks is having validators around, whether you're there or not there, to throw your name into conversation when people are planning a meeting or talking about opportunities, jobs, that kind of thing, to say, I know Sam, he's incredible, he worked with me on this thing, you should pull him into this conversation, he'd be great. Or, if you are in the room, to say, echoing Erin's point, just sort of give you some vision, visibility, back you up a little bit. It really makes all the difference in terms of confidence.
I would totally agree, and particularly at the State House, and as Sibu can attest, your peer network is very important, because it's a big building, but it's a small building. Pretty much everyone everyone knows each other. I may be biased, but I think the greatest people in the world work at the State House, and no matter whether your boss is a Republican, and then and Sibu's boss, former boss, was Senator Chang Diaz, who was a Democrat. But Sibu and I were still able to talk and be able to be friends. And a lot of times, your peer network are going to be with people that are working on maybe something completely opposite of what you're working on. But it's good to have people to bounce ideas off of, and you get to learn a lot from each other. And the State House is a interesting place in that when people leave, it feels like they're leaving college again, because it's such a small place that has a lot of camaraderie, and you make lifelong friends there. And then on the mentorship front, definitely it's very important to have mentors, because having a mentor, someone that has kind of gone the road that you may want to go down, they're a good person to be able to bounce ideas off of. They're the ones that you can be able to say, hey, I'm thinking about doing X, Y, and Z, and they can be able to tell you, that you may want to go this path, because when I tried it, this is what happened. This may be a better way to go. So having a mentor is definitely a very good thing in order to be able to help kind of guide you through the process.
It's also just easier to get things done with friends. So much easier.
Best mentor story, worst mentor story. And I say that to say, you don't have to name names. I just look at Sibu's face. I say that to say, right? Quite often you hear, oh yes, mentors are important, go find mentors. And so you go up to somebody and you have this very awkward, stilted conversation, and maybe you have a resume or a business card in hand, and it goes nowhere, right? It's like the world's most awkward first date, but even worse, because then you have to continue to see this person that you've tried to engage in. Not that I'm speaking from personal experience, but I am, right? So this is what I mean in terms of like really kind of giving some practical advice for the best ways to cultivate those mentor relationships, because it's not quite as easy as going up to somebody and saying, Sam, you're awesome. Like, can you mentor me and show me the ways of public service? That would be a little creepy, right? Maybe.
I'd do it for you.
Awesome. So like, I mean, so seriously, like how do you go about kind of cultivating those mentor relationships?
My piece of advice, my piece of advice would be to make yourself valuable. Like, make yourself known, make yourself valuable, offer to help with something, assist with something, prove that you are someone who's reliable and has an opinion and thoughts that are worthy of contributing to the conversation, and it'll happen naturally.
Hello. Is it working? Hello. Oh, thank you. I guess you were done with me. Regarding cultivating those mentors, I find it very helpful to just see people who have similar connections. Maybe someone who sits on a board who's connected to another board. It's like 8 degrees of separation, trying to connect yourself and build some kind of rapport with someone who you may not have a relationship with. I find that taking someone out for coffee is really valuable. You'll spend like $7 on it, and it does add up, but you walk away being able to have candid conversations with people who you look up to. And that begins the relationship building. And I recommend just reaching out to those people every so often, like, hey, I saw your organization in the news, congratulations. And just being always in touch as much as possible. That's been helpful for me.
Also remember that your, potential mentor is also human, so they make mistakes too. They are having their challenges with their own projects. So like Erin said, make yourself available. Say, hey, listen, I know that you are working on this project. I have some time after work or on the weekends. Let me know how I can help, because that way they learn to rely on you, and eventually you guys will become close. So I just recommend remembering that they're not perfect individuals as well.
I totally agree with what everyone else said, and also be persistent. If they don't get back to you after like a couple times, try once more. The worst thing that could happen is they either don't respond or they say no. And the other important thing to know about mentors is they don't necessarily need to be, in their 40s or 50s and like well entrenched in their career. It could be someone that you're just, as Sam mentioned, someone that is working on a project that you're interested in, and you want to try and help them, and you know, take them out for coffee or whatnot, and that way you can be able to cultivate the relationship going further, because you guys work on one project, another project comes up, and they remember how well you work together, so they'll ask you, hey, I got something else coming up, do you want to help me out with it?
So those of you who worked on campaigns, what's your favorite campaign song?
If
I know you have one.
If I hear Dropkick Murphys Shipping Up to Boston one more time, at first, you know, it was very cute when, you know, random places would, you know, attribute that.
Remember?
We did, and that's kind of when I saw.
Don't Stop Believin' for Bill Clinton. That was a good one. Also up there would be Signed, Sealed, Delivered, Obama. Fight Song by Hillary Clinton, it's too soon.
Yeah,
Still
too
hurts.
soon.
That one still hurts.
Well, I can't listen to U2 anymore because of the different campaigns, so that'd probably be my least favorite.
I covered, what is it? Is it Roar? I can't hear that. I heard that way too much in multiple elections. And I bring this up because you all have mentioned campaigns and campaigning, and that being like an entree into the work that you do. And so let's talk about campaigns in this last election, presidential election we had. And what do you think the impact of that is on getting young people, millennials, involved in public service?
The amount of times I've heard from my friends that have kind of been apolitical the past couple years of, you know, they're ready to get involved, you know, I'm so angry, I'm so upset. It's inspiring, but also I kind of challenge them and say, well, what are you going to do about it, you know? I always tell them, there's a city council race going on, there's the mayor's race going on, we have the governor's race, you know, next year, you know. 2018, you know, congressional and senate races are coming up. Call your friends from, you know, your colleges, or if you know people in different states that have these different races, you know, get involved that way. I think I'm hopeful, but I'm a little nervous because as a millennial, we like to be comfortable, and so it's kind of the cool thing now to say, you know, I'm ready to fight, like I'm ready to get involved, and then nothing happens, and then you just get angry in the next 4 years. So
I was going to say that I find it very inspiring. This past election, my caucus added a couple millennial state reps. So that's changed kind of the discussions that we've been having in the caucus. So I'm very hopeful that that continues. Even before the election, you know, you're seeing more and more legislators who are just about your age. Sometimes in the elevator, you don't know if you're looking at an intern or a state senator. So the building is becoming younger and younger, and the stuff that we're working on is reflecting that. So I'm hopeful.
I think it's definitely something to be seen. I was actually just looking up this stat that the millennial vote was, I think, 19% of the vote in 2016, which was the same amount as it was in 2012. And 2012 was when you had President Obama on the ballot. So, and then in 2016, you still, when you had, you know, President Trump and Secretary Clinton on the ballot, there wasn't really, I feel like unless there's another candidate that really kind of galvanizes the millennial vote, one thing about kind of like the millennial vote from everything that I've read is that we don't like to be put into boxes. So there's not really necessarily one particular Democrat or one particular Republican that may galvanize the millennial voter. They like to pick and choose between different qualities. So maybe if there's a third party candidate that kind of appeals to the millennial vote, that it could be maybe the first time where we see the third party candidate have an impact since maybe the '92 election.
Yeah, there's definitely a renewed energy around political participation and civic engagement since 2016, for better or for worse. But and echoing Sam's point, I've heard from a lot of acquaintances that I haven't heard from in many years in the last year, saying like, you know, thank you for being involved in Hillary's campaign. I was posting on Facebook all the time, and you know, people know from my small hometown know what I do and how do you get involved, that sort of thing. And I would always, you know, similar to Sam, challenge them in the sense that like Facebook posts don't vote, signs don't vote, arguments at bars don't vote. Votes are votes, and you know, we're all former campaigners up here. Like, take a packet, go walk your neighborhood, knock on doors and talk to people, make phone calls after work one night a week during the next election if you are galvanized by a candidate. Like, that is what makes votes happen. Like, you know, it's one thing to watch the news and talk about it with your coworkers, but it's actually just, you know, finding that campaign office. We all have Google at our fingertips, walking in, they will give you a packet.
Just to kind of build off of what Erin said, particularly with, I think, trying to get more involved, I think one thing that, and it's weird saying to us millennials, is kind of get off of social media, because to a certain extent, you're basically retreat to your own echo chambers. A lot of stories during the 2016 campaign, they compared what a person who supported President Trump saw on their Facebook feed versus what someone who supported Secretary Clinton saw. And it was basically just people reevaluated, basically getting their points just basically reevaluated by people who are like-minded. I think one way to get engaged is to be able to at least talk and be able to discuss topics with people that you disagree with, and try and find some common ground. I think by doing that, you're going to have more engagement with other people, instead of just retreating to the echo chambers of Facebook or Twitter.
I mean, do you think the renewed energy will sustain? You all have talked about renewed energy, right? Like hashtags, like online activism. Will it maintain? Will it be sustained, or will it eventually retreat, and will folks kind of go back to business as usual until something else happens to raise the energy level?
I think that the past couple of months we've seen things that we've never witnessed before, and experienced things that we hadn't really vocalized as a nation yet. So I think that as long as each day brings a new challenge, I feel that we'll continue to have that renewed energy. Yeah.
I think. I'm sorry. Oh, I was going to say, I think it has to go hand in hand with trying to know more about various topics and issues, and becoming more engaged with what exactly is going on, because you'll have a lot of people out protesting, but they may not know what they're protesting for. They may be protesting just because their friends say, you know, let's go out to the common. But at least know what you're protesting. You know, if you become more engaged and have a sense of knowing what you're fighting for, I think that will be something that will help kind of keep the renewed interest as it was going. But it's going to take trying to remain actively involved and on top of what's going on every day. And as we know, the news changes about every second nowadays. So.
My Twitter feed is probably blowing up in the green room. Okay, so now we're going to take some questions from the audience. Does anyone have anything to ask our illustrious panel? Yes, sir. Oh, wait, I think there's a microphone coming your way. Sorry. 1 second.
Hi, my name is Lucas. I'm a student here at UMass Boston. And I kind of wrote my question down because it's kind of a long question, but don't you think it's a kind of a misconception that millennials are disengaged, but rather that they're disenfranchised from engaging in the political system, because a lot of the politicians now are kind of like not really perceptive to our needs on a more fundamental level? Because in essence, like the Democrats, they do support more socially liberal policies, but don't focus on the economic hardships that millennials are facing now. And then Republicans kind of focus on the more, the thing that turns millennials off of Republicans is that they're really kind of socially conservative on the federal level for the most part. So don't you think it's kind of a misconception that it's like the millennials that are not engaging, but rather the people at the top that are not engaging down with us and are kind of disenfranchising us from engaging in the first place?
I mean, I think that's why it's so important for millennials to get involved in the political process, because if your representatives don't know that you exist and what you're dealing with, then they're just going to continue to pass whichever laws they feel that you think you would benefit from. And a lot of people don't realize that, like I said earlier, you don't have to be in politics to affect change. You know, a lot of, politicians and policymakers, they do reach out to different advocacy groups. And they also do listen to, average citizens. When was the last time you went to a public event with a public figure and told them, hey, I really appreciate your leadership on this bill that you sponsored, or hey, I really don't appreciate, I didn't appreciate your comments at this event. I think, good or bad, they appreciate hearing from constituents and working with you on how to rectify that situation.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say disengaged or disenfranchised are the right word. I would more think of it as disconnected. Politics is a game of, who wants what, and if the majority of people want a thing, most politicians are going to adjust their positions to accommodate the thing that the people want. That's just kind of how it works. And then, I think that there are a lot of ways to make that known. And I think this election was really interesting because a lot of young people realized that for the first time, that, just being a body at one of those massive Bernie Sanders rallies contributed to these stories that swept the nation about how, millennials are finally waking up, and, we have to start thinking about what policies they want to advocate for. And, those stories are what extended his run for as long as they did. And, people did that by showing up, by coming together. So I think just making that connection is really important. It's not really anybody's fault.
Does anybody else have a question? Because I was going to piggyback on his if no one else does before I get to this. So it almost sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, on some level, what is the reception that you all receive in your roles from your more mature, shall we say, coworkers and supervisors, right? So less about voters electing public servants, voters affecting policy, but like when you are in your role in the office and you are like directly responding to a supervisor, how do they engage and respond and react to your millennial ideals? Or do they shoo you away and say, that's not the way we do it, so we're not going to do it that way anymore?
I would just like to give a big shout out to our boss, the mayor. When Sam and I started working for him, I counted checks in the backseat of his car. Sam tweeted, his driver is now his deputy chief of staff. Mayor Walsh, when I was 23 years old, would look at me and be like, what do I do? How should I handle this? And just having somebody, talk to you like that, it really set this kind of tone within City Hall that like age wasn't going to speak to everything. It's obviously really important, and we do have a young staff. The mayor's new chief of staff is 33. I'm 27. Sam's 27. And there's a lot of that. Amy's 27. Maybe I aged you a year. But where you lose a little bit of institutional knowledge when you have surround yourself with really young staff. But it is, a cultural thing. I work with people who are in their 60s who, because the mayor set the tone that you are to respect your younger colleagues, it's never been a problem.
I would say within my caucus, so first I'm a one-woman shop, so I work by myself a lot. So I embrace a lot of millennial ideas. But in terms of my organization, they've been really open to new ideas, new technologies. So it's been really helpful to have their support as we try to lead those.
And I think a lot of older people actually appreciate innovative ideas. If you see something that's not being brought up, bring it up and show how this can work. You know, a lot of our older peers, you know, they're used to doing things a very certain way. And so if you can go to them and say, you know, I know we've done X for 45 years, but however, I have done a lot of research on topic Y, and you know, I've seen that this has worked in other places. I think it could work here. Let's try it out. And a lot of people just say, you know, let's try out for 6 months. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But if it does, they also, you know, will feel good about themselves because they'll say, oh, well, look how innovative I am. You know, I'm open-minded. You know, that was my idea. But I think you have to be willing to go out on a limb and try something new and basically show, you know, your older peers and your older bosses that this could work and to take a chance.
I would agree with what everyone said, and I think to a certain extent, for the office I work in, the tone really starts from the top, similar to the mayor, but with Senator Tarr, and then down, and then our great chief of staff, and then kind of filters through the rest of the staff. And I think the really important thing is that even as millennials, if you're dealing with people that are older staff, if you show them respect, if you show them respect, they'll show you respect, and I think respect and everything is a two-way street. So I think that's probably one of the most important things, no matter how old you are, but particularly if there's, if millennials have this sort of stereotype that you want to try and break the mold of.
What do you, all of you have been in public service and also from a campaign level, but represent our generation fairly well, I think it's fair to say. But a question that I would ask you is, what do we lose when millennials don't participate in civic engagement in public? What is it that we lose when millennials don't engage in public service or civic life?
That's a great question.
Yeah. I think at first I end up losing probably what's soon to be one of the largest voting blocks in the country, and I think this kind of stems upon I'm sorry, Lucas's question that, and I think that maybe the term for millennials might be maybe we're disillusioned at times. A lot of us came of age, particularly during the Great Recession. During the past election cycle, you always read stories about, particularly millennials and such, being concerned that their parents are going to leave them worse off than their parents did. You're seeing stories all the time now about millennials, not because of student loan debt or whatever, not being able to purchase a home, get married, kind of put off being able to achieve, quote unquote, the American dream. So I think that's something that that you could end up dealing with is if millennials become disillusioned, you're going to end up losing almost a generation of potential leaders and new thoughts and ideas.
You lose the actual physical energy too, and the idealism of a age group that isn't necessarily hampered by family and years of a career and home ownership and things that the things that you care about and that really light your fire start to change over time, and those things become, I think, probably a lot more specific and a lot more tailored to what your actual situation is, whereas you look at these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed kids coming out of college and they want to change the world, and the world hasn't really beaten them down yet. So I think it's important to include young voices for the idealism of it, but also just who's going to do the work. You need young people who are willing to work late hours and sacrifice a huge paycheck to work on campaigns and work in public service and go knock on doors in strange neighborhoods because they don't have families at home that they have to feed in an hour. So I think you lose the tangible effect as well.
Yeah, and you lose your value. You know, if people know that the millennial voting bloc isn't going to come out and vote, then they're just not going to do what's best for millennials. You know, let's say if there's a topic that's important to us, you know, student loan, you know, reforming. If millennials don't go out and vote, people that are 50, 60, 70 years old who don't have student loans anymore, that doesn't affect them, you know? So, or, you know, when it comes to the tea, or when it comes to, you know, different things that are important to millennials, if you don't go out and vote, people aren't going to listen to what you have to say.
Yeah, campaign and political strategy is not about, like, how do we appeal to these people so that we can make them become voters. It's how do we appeal to voters? How do we appeal to the engaged? So you have to become engaged in order to become, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, basically.
So it sounds like you lose representation
You lose representation.
if you're not involved. Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for being here. I think it's incredibly important just to have your visibility, like showing our generation that you guys exist and you guys are representing us, so thank you. My question kind of jumps off of the previous conversation regarding kind of the differences that the generation gap can cause. However, I want to talk about like your individual passions that build bridges, and, you know, what are the reasons that you get up every morning? What are you passionate about in terms of issues? And obviously you want to represent our generation, but there are issues that affect multiple ranges of ages. So yeah, that's my general question.
Just to understand, you just kind of want to know what like gets us up in the morning, what issues kind of drive our days. I mean, for me, you know, obviously in my role as the mayor's LGBTQ liaison, that community is very important to me, but it's also important to me that underrepresented constituencies have a voice. I think under this administration, a lot of ugly voices have come out, and there are a lot of people that are afraid now to even speak up. And so, you know, it's important for people like us, and I'm just going to feel like to talk about for all of us. It's important for people like us to speak up and let people know that we are involved and we are not going to tolerate rights being taken away and people feeling like they are a second-class citizen. So that's what, you know, gets me going in the morning.
So sometimes some mornings it's hard to get up. It's hard to get up and read the news and hear about some incidents that's happened in some part of the country, and a person of color was killed, or their rights were taken away. And so on those days it's hard to get out of bed sometimes, but I definitely see things in the lens of racial justice, and I know that if I don't get up and work towards improving that situation here, then I'm no good. So that definitely keeps me going and keeps my fire going. I try to see racial justice in you know, not just one area of policy. You know, it extends beyond criminal justice reform, even though that's very critical. But also there's racial justice needs in transportation, public health, in so many different issue areas. So that's what really drives me every day.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback off of Sibu and Sam, it's one of those where, you know, for myself, and kind of disclaimer, this is me not talking on behalf of Senator Tarr on this one, but, you know, kind of issues surrounding education, whether there's different models that are available with regards to how how schools are funded, B, you know, if the kids currently in school are actually learning. There's, you know, trying to work on different models there. When it comes to criminal justice reform, is there, you know, some balance where we can still maintain, kind of talking about, some mandatory minimums versus making sure that, people aren't going to jail for petty crimes. I think that in whatever respect there's middle ground to be had, and that's kind of what I kind of hope to work towards, particularly in the area of education, criminal justice, and what have you.
Yeah, so my job in public service is a little bit different than others. I'm the mayor's scheduler. I live by his life. And I'm not going to lie, my job is really hard. It's really, really hard. And there are many days that I'm like, I can't do it today. Like I threw a book at a wall today. Like there are those days. And the two things that keep me going, one, I love this city. I really, really love this city. I love the people. I love the amenities. I love the vibe here. I love the culture. I love how the different neighborhoods have different accents and different local restaurants. I love everything about it. And I want the best for this city. And number two is I believe in my guy. I believe in my boss. I believe that he is the man to lead this city right now. And, he's never, to quote one of his friends, he's never made a mistake of the heart. It's all there for that. So the frustrations, the complications, the aiming for here and landing here and having that be quite a struggle is worth it because I feel like I'm doing the right thing by my boss and by my city.
On that note, we are going to have some closing remarks from Natalie Boyle with the Institute. Thank you.
Thanks. We just wanted to say, I'm Natalie Boyle, I'm our communications director here at the Institute, and we just wanted to say a final thank you to everyone for coming out tonight for this conversation. Thank you, Senator, for sharing your personal journey into public service. Thank you to our panel for sharing your wisdom and your advice, and hopefully giving some folks some ideas on how to engage civically. And thank you, Akilah, for moderating the conversation. I wanted to remind everyone that we will have a networking reception just outside in the front lobby, so a good opportunity to have some of those connections and maybe meet some of your potential future mentors. We have some additional upcoming programs here this fall, so be sure to check them out on our website, sign up for our email list, and thank you so much for coming.